forward. Just shortly after that, the South World Trade Center collapsed. That was the second building hit this morning. It had been hit lower, and it just gave way. And about 15 minutes after that, the North World Trade Center collapsed. It is incredible for those of us who covered the World Trade Center bombing back in the 90s to take a look down now and at first see that scene replayed, and now those World Trade Center buildings absolutely gone, all 110 stories. 50,000 people, as you mentioned, work in those buildings. We do not know how many of them were able to get out safely with their lives, nor how many are injured. We do know that New York area hospitals, several of them say they are full. They're asking anyone in the area to donate blood as soon as possible, saying there is a critical need for it. We also know that all U.S. commercial airplanes have been grounded. That is the first time in history this action has been taken. We know that some airplanes were diverted to Canada, including some incoming international airplanes that were bound for the U.S. Most federal, or all federal, and most state buildings here in the U.S. have been closed, and most major landmarks, including Wrigley Field in Chicago, the Bell down in Philadelphia, the Merchandise Mart in Chicago, those areas also have been closed. Here in Manhattan, all major buildings are in a state of very heightened security. People are being required to show ID, and if they leave buildings, in many cases, not being allowed to return in. The president, as we said, is apparently safe. He left Sarasota, Florida, where he had been attending an elementary school, reading a book to children when he was first notified of the original attack on the World Trade Center. We do not know where he is at this point. Newt Gingrich says this obviously is an act of state-sponsored terrorism. As you said, John, he's likening it to the attack on Pearl Harbor. And meanwhile, Tom Daschle, the Senate Majority Leader, saying that the president is getting everyone's full support. We will update you as soon as we get more information down here. Right now, John, back to you.
Edie Donahue in the Fox Newsroom. Thank you very much. Again, continuing to keep an eye on the situation unfolding in downtown Manhattan, where the World Trade Center workplace on a normal day of 50,000 people is gone, obliterated by two strikes from those two airplanes today. Also now, Washington, D.C., the Pentagon still on fire after another airplane apparently was hijacked and employed as a flying bomb to attack the nerve center of our nation's military. David Schuster is in the Pentagon and has this late report for us. Dave?
John, we can report for you that the Pentagon fire is still out of control. Flames have started now about 100 feet away from where it's clear you can see where the plane hit the south side of the Pentagon. Eyewitnesses describe a silver commercial jetliner, possibly a United Airlines. It's not been confirmed, but a silver commercial jetliner slamming into the south side of the Pentagon this morning at approximately 9:40 a.m. It hit the outer ring of the Pentagon. There are 5 rings of the Pentagon, and at this very moment you can literally see a hole in the side of the Pentagon of perhaps 150 feet wide, where 5 floors in that hole have literally collapsed. We can see that flames have spread to the center part of the Pentagon, to some of the inner rings. In addition, on the outer ring, the E ring that was initially hit by that plane, now about 100 feet away, flames are leaping out of some of the office windows there. Smoke has been pouring through the Pentagon hallways for much of the last hour and a half or so, and about 15 minutes ago, some of the smoke started coming in from another side of the Pentagon. We're sort of smack dab there in the middle. But in any case, there are plenty of fire and rescue on the scene. Local hospitals reporting dozens of injuries being taken there from the Pentagon. One can only imagine how many fatalities there must have been if indeed it was a commercial jetliner that slammed into the side of the Pentagon. While most of the Pentagon has been evacuated, we can report that military officials are telling us that the U.S. Joint Forces Command in Norfolk, Virginia, reports that the Atlantic Fleet, which is the largest collection of military assets on the East Coast, has now gone to threat condition Charlie. This is second from the top. Only Delta is higher. The Air Combat Command is located in Norfolk, Virginia, and they have responsibility for coordinating United States-based military assets in support of civilian agencies like the Federal Emergency Management Agency and the Department of Justice. There's a group called the Joint Task Force Civil Support, which has its headquarters in Norfolk, which is going to coordinate what assets will go where to sort of secure areas such as the Pentagon and other areas areas in the Washington area and the New York area to help with the aftermath of the incidents. But again, the Air Combat Command located in Norfolk, Virginia, and other agencies of the U.S. military are now at threat condition Delta. This is second from the, I'm just being told now that that is the highest threat condition that the military has, threat condition Delta. We had initially reported that the Atlantic Fleet was at threat condition Charlie. Threat condition Delta, John, is the level at which the United States military goes to when it declares, or when the president declares, or when the military perceives an act of war. So the military is now at the same level that it would be if the United States was engaged in a war. But again, here at the Pentagon, while most of the employees of the Pentagon have been cleared from this building, there's still the National Military Command Center, which continues to operate in the base of the Pentagon, a secure bunker, if you will, in this Pentagon, which is, of course, built to withstand these sort of attacks. And while the smoke is pretty thick in our side of the building, we can tell you that at 9:40 this morning, when eyewitnesses described this jetliner slamming into the side of the Pentagon, that people here, including our own producer, said they did not hear or see anything. There were no shock waves. There was no sound. There was only a large plume of smoke. And then came the reports from inside the Pentagon that the Pentagon was on fire. And I can tell you at this point, the Pentagon is still on fire, that the fire has not been contained. It has spread to some of the inner rings of the Pentagon, as well as spreading along some of the outer rings. And again, just to report that the Atlantic Fleet, some of the military command and control are now at ThreatCon Delta. That is the largest threat level in the United States military. It's the threat level which the military goes to when it is engaged in a war. John, back to you.
All right, David Schuster reporting live from the Pentagon. Thank you. The question, of course, if America is in fact under attack, as it clearly is, how does the military respond? They are in that threat condition Delta, but no one knows where or how at this point to respond. Let's go to my colleague Shepard Smith, who has a bird's eye view of what's happening in Manhattan from Midtown. Shepard?
John, as you've been getting the updates from Washington and other places, we've been watching the streets of Manhattan. There is certainly concern of how people might react. And I can tell you that at this moment, the initial reaction was calm, and now Manhattan has taken on a whole new sort of flavor. I want to take this camera because I can't see what you see. I'm going to take the camera and show you around a bit as well as I can. We're going to begin. We're on the top of a building at 47th Street and 7th Avenue, or 6th Avenue in Midtown Manhattan. This is 42nd Street. And you can see there was a lot of traffic in this street until a short time ago, but now you can see 42nd Street at the corner of Broadway has become a sort of sea of people. At this time of day, midday in Manhattan, this would normally be on a Tuesday afternoon, a very busy traffic area. It is not today. I'm going to pull out over here and take you, this is 47th Street, panning now, going up towards 7th Avenue. Now, this avenue is northbound, as you can see, and traffic is pretty well gridlocked there. There's very little of it, actually. And looking over toward the Hudson River, there's very little traffic across all of Manhattan. Now, we are looking right now over the Hudson River west in Manhattan, panning around now in the skyscrapers. This is where the World Trade Center stood, and down here is the TKTS building. This is another high traffic area in Midtown, an area with which most people who have ever visited New York would be quite familiar. This is the spot where you line up for Broadway tickets, and at this time of day, just after 12 o'clock, this would normally be a sea of literally thousands of people who are working their way around, getting their lunch and that sort of thing. You're looking live now in Times Square, a scene rarely repeated. Let's get back to this camera, because I'm going to pan down this street. When you're back on this camera, Bernie, let me know. And I'm going to pan down what is Broadway Avenue, making your way down. This would eventually take you all the way down to the Financial District, panning across this building and back over to 42nd Street. I want to try to give you a look down the avenue toward what is the Diamond District. This is a little tricky, as you might imagine. This is the entrance to the Diamond District, right outside the Fox News studios. That would be the Diamond District, looking 47th Street now, all the way toward the East River. Absolutely no traffic in Manhattan today. Nothing. It initially started, cabs were running. I was able to get one about 9:30, 10 o'clock. Most of the cabs are no longer running, and the river crossings are now closed. All of Manhattan is shut down, and there is what was the World Trade Center. To say that there is chaos in the streets would be absolutely inaccurate. This is a city that prides itself on its ability to maintain amid the chaos, and that appears to be what's happening today. No violence in the streets, no problems to speak of, no incidents anywhere in Manhattan that I can tell you about. Certainly downtown would be a completely different story, but this city is not reacting in a violent way at all. There is calm here in Midtown, John, at least.
All right, Shepard Smith, thank you very much for that update. Of course, the World Trade Center, it sounds unbelievable to speak the words, but the World Trade Center is essentially gone, struck by two airplanes. Apparently, both of them hijacked. We are now getting a report, a confirmation from United Airlines that two of its planes are gone. One of them, apparently, the plane that crashed near Pittsburgh. But look here, this is the second plane that struck the World Trade Center shortly after 9 o'clock Eastern Time this morning. An earlier plane left the tower of smoke in the upper stories of the building on the right there. So both towers hit by planes, they burned for a while, and then one at a time, they both collapsed. We have an onlooker who gave us what is sort of a horrific description of what it all looked like, sounded like, and felt like. Let's hear from that person now.
I saw the building falling down.
Say that again, I didn't hear you.
I saw people jumping from the building, from the 100th floor, and I saw the building just coming down.
It is absolutely an appalling day, not only here in Manhattan, but also in Washington, where the Pentagon also was apparently the subject of a strike by one of these hijacked airliners, flying bombs, really. The Pentagon, in these pictures taken earlier, but still very much on fire. The damage there perhaps not as severe as it is at the World Trade Center, but clearly America is under attack. I want to bring into the conversation a man who long planned for and never experienced this kind of event. Howard Safir, the former police commissioner and also fire commissioner, if I'm correct, of the city of New York. You got to be wondering about the guys who you once commanded both on the fire and police departments, who were no doubt trying to help people get out of those buildings when they came down around them.
Well, it's incomprehensible. We planned for all kinds of terrorist attacks, biological warfare, chemical warfare, but nobody envisioned two commercial airliners slamming into the World Trade Center. And I can tell you that although New York has the greatest emergency services in the world, they are being strained by the triage, by the number of injured, and by the requirements of this disaster.
I'm just guessing that most of those brave police and firefighters would have been clustered right around the base of those buildings, right? When we thought we had only a fire, clearly there would have been glass falling. We even had reports of people jumping out of the upper floors simply because they couldn't tolerate the smoke anymore. But a lot of your people would have been gathered at the base of those buildings when they came down.
Absolutely. Firefighters and police officers run into danger. They don't run away from it. And unfortunately, and I hope I'm wrong, there's probably going to be serious loss of life in both agencies as well as in the civilian area. I've been talking to some of the people at hospitals, and the hospitals are totally overwhelmed. They're triaging people they can help and making sure they don't spend time on people they can't.
I'm sure it's a speech that you never wanted to give, but what do you tell people? What do you tell America right now? How do we behave?
Well, my view is the way we behave is we assess who did this, we find out who they are, and then we make sure that we send a message that is clear, because terrorists only understand one thing. They understand force, they understand strength, and this is a time when we can't be weak. This is a time when we have to go and find out who did this and make them pay for it.
As for the reaction of the citizens of New York, the plea is out for people to donate blood. Is there anything else that New Yorkers can do right now?
Well, I think they can donate blood, but they really need to stay calm. They need to follow the instructions of the emergency service personnel. This is an incredibly difficult situation for police and firefighters. The National Guard will be coming in this evening, and this is something where citizens should pretty much, they don't have to be out, stay home.
Yeah, so stay off the streets if you possibly can. What about communications? We already know that phone lines in and out of New York are swamped. There are going to be thousands, millions of people perhaps across the country who may know somebody who worked in the World Trade Center. What do you tell them?
Well, this is still a rescue operation. There's still people who need help. There's still people who are alive in that wreckage who can be helped. And what people should do is, unless it's an emergency, don't use your telephone.
Let's go now to a man who experienced something like this. Frank Keating, the governor of Oklahoma, is joining us. Of course, he was in office at the time of what had been the worst terrorist attack America experienced, that of the domestic kind. Frank Keating, as you look at these pictures, what is going through your mind?
Well, this really is a day of agony and infamy for America.
Again, we have lost our connection with Frank Keating, a former FBI agent and the governor of Oklahoma. You got to understand, folks, that many of the communications lifelines in New York City ran through the World Trade Center. There were satellite dishes sprouting like mushrooms from the top of that building. There was a huge television tower, and all of that now is gone. Our Washington managing editor, Brit Hume, once again has the view from the nation's capital. Brit?
This gives us a sense of the state of official worry and knowledge here. Richard Shelby, the senator from Alabama, who is the leading Republican and now vice chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, has come out. One would presume if anybody would know a lot about what the U.S. officials know, he would. And he said all he knew about was the two plane attacks in New York, the one at the Pentagon, and he said that they had heard something had happened in western Pennsylvania. That, of course, consistent with the reports we've had about a Pittsburgh airport. So the sense we have is that many officials, many senior people here in Washington may know less than we do, at least officially, about what has happened here.
All right, Brit Hume, thanks.
John McCain is on Capitol Hill speaking, and we got an ear out for him as well.
All right, Britt, thanks very much. Newt Gingrich, the former Speaker of the House, was on the air with us not long ago and described this as the 21st century Pearl Harbor, and that does not overstate it. There may be as many as, on a typical day, there would be 50,000 people working in the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center, and those towers are gone. How many of those people were able to evacuate, we do not know. Once again, to Brit Hume in Washington. Brit?
John, we believe we've been joined now on the telephone by Republican Senator John McCain of Arizona. Senator, thank you very much. As a senior member of the U.S. Senate and a man deeply concerned with the U.S. military, what can you tell us beyond what we know about, first of all, about the attack at the Pentagon?
I can't tell you, Brett, anything that more than the information that you have, and I think that's probably the case with most members of Congress at this moment. I'm not in disagreement with others who said that this is an act of war, and there aren't words to describe adequately the enormity of these attacks and the depravity of those who would commit them. But I have no additional information, and I'm not sure that in the short term there will be a lot disclosed to members of Congress as they acquire it. But the fact is that this is an enormity that staggers the imagination.
Senator, you and others have described this as an act of war. What are the implications of seeing it in that light, rather than a mere lone or isolated act of terrorism? What are the policy implications? What kinds of steps are now possible or might be taken by this government in the light of viewing it as an act of war?
I think that means that the Congress acts to support the President of the United States in any actions that he needs to take to make sure that those who are responsible, whether they be governments or they be individuals or groups of individuals, that whatever measures need to be taken will be taken, and consider the United States now on the basis of a war, and go on to that footing and use whatever assets and efforts that are necessary to bring those to justice, and at the same time prevent ever a reoccurrence of a tragedy and a crime of this enormity.
Senator, we've been seeing just for the last couple of minutes some live pictures of injured people arriving at a hospital in New York for treatment there. Obviously, it would appear based on what we know, that the loss of life is going to be very great indeed. Your sense from knowing the Pentagon and knowing the area where that airplane hit, fire still going over there. Do you have any? What can you tell us about that part of the building? Number of people work there, that kind of thing.
Well, as you know, the Pentagon is a very large building, and which may work to our benefit here, as opposed to the trade towers. I can't make an estimate, but fortunately, the Pentagon is a very large building. So let's pray that that the extent of the casualties has been limited by that. Obviously, there's casualties, but what staggers the imagination, as I heard you talking, is the 50,000 people that work at the trade towers. This is, we pray for them and their families, and it's a tragedy that, again, words become inadequate very quickly when describing something of this nature. But I'm sure the President will lead us. I am sure that the President will reassure the American people, and all of us, all Americans, will commit ourselves to making sure that those who committed it pay the heaviest price, whether they be governments or individuals, including governments that may have harbored groups that were responsible for this, and we will make sure that there's never a reoccurrence. And I know that's no consolation to the grieving families, but I don't think we can do more, except I am confident the President of the United States will lead, and the American people can bestow their confidence upon his leadership.
Senator, what you're saying suggests, as others may have mentioned, that life in the United States will not again be the same anytime soon. Would you agree with that?
I totally agree with that. And again, it's incomprehensible and reprehensible, and none of us that I know of ever imagined something this enormity, and well orchestrated, obviously.
Senator, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thanks, Brett.
We now have Brian Wilson, I believe, able to report to us on what he's been hearing. He's up on Capitol Hill. Brian, what are you hearing, buddy?
Well, I'm hearing a lot of things, Britt. One of the things that we're hearing in the last few minutes is from Senator Richard Shelby, who is a member of the Senate Intelligence Committee, who told us there has been no advance warning, and they call this very well organized, and he says that they had no advance warning that it was coming at all. And usually they do have some indication from the intelligence community. So very surprised. They say, of course, they know about what happened at the Pentagon. They know about what happened at the World Trade Center. They're still trying to figure out exactly what happened in western Pennsylvania. But members of Congress are coming out and expressing in the strongest terms that the intelligence community failed to give them any advance warning and any kind of information about this, that it caught them completely off guard. One member of Congress, Congressman Kurt Weldon of Pennsylvania, said, the government has failed the people of this country, and that's an indictment on both parties. Rick?
Brian, it does certainly seem that these members of Congress not only had no advance warning, or that the government had no advance warning, they don't seem to know very much about what actually happened, do they?
No, and Senator Shelby said we're still getting briefings, but information is very sketchy and communications are scrambled, an indication that they're not getting a good flow of information. And an overall sense that perhaps more will have to be done to shore up the intelligence budgets in the days ahead, but also, just complete outrage, Britt, that somehow the millions and billions of dollars that we spend on intelligence in this country somehow let this one slip through the cracks.
All right, Brian Wilson, thank you very much. John Scott, that's it from here for the moment. One last note. We learned a few minutes ago that Secret Service agents had sprinted up the street from the White House and cleared people away from a bag that was sitting in the middle of the street there up at the corner of Connecticut Avenue and I Street, right by the Army-Navy Club there in Washington. It turns out apparently that the bag has been found to be harmless. So one more of these false alarms, of which there have been a number, and doubtless will be many more, has been put to rest. John?
All right, Britt Hume in Washington, thank you very much. You are looking at the pictures of what is left of the World Trade Center in Lower Manhattan. Really not much. These pictures coming to you now live. We're going to show you what happened earlier this morning, 9 o'clock Eastern Time. You can see there are people who are leaning out the windows. At that point, they were hoping for some kind of rescue. There was smoke throughout the building, and they couldn't breathe inside, so they were breaking out the windows of that building and hoping for some kind of rescue. ultimately, a number of these people simply decided to end their misery and jumped. We are going to get some late information now from Fox producer Dan Cohen, who saw much of this going on. Dan, this is an awful, awful day. What can you add to what we've already seen?
Well, I got here, as you were just saying, and the people jumping out of the buildings, that's about when I arrived. And I'm also an emergency medical technician, so I came down to see if I could help. I identified myself to some of the people that were setting up the medical command posts. We had gotten everything set up. They were doing an amazing job of instantly just having everything organized. As soon as we got the medical command post set up, and I was with a team of other fire department EMTs, we were about to go off and treat some people we had been assigned to treat. All of a sudden we looked up, before we looked up, we heard what sounded like basically a jet airliner landing right on top of our heads. Looked up, and the building was just coming down. The entire command post that I was at just started running. The wall of smoke came up behind us, and I think most of us came out of it. I lost the crew that I was with. They started setting up another command post, and then sure enough, about 5 minutes later, we were treating some of the people that had gotten trapped the first time. Someone said that the tower's leaning, We all started running, and that's when the tower came down completely. I managed to get out. A lot of the people did not, and were trapped back under the debris. Once the dust started to clear a little, we went in, took some firemen out. A lot of the firemen had already been in the building at that point. We put as many as we could on some ferries as we were by the water at this point, sent them over to Jersey City for treatment. And from that point on, it's pretty much been chaos. I mean, the New York City Emergency Service has been doing an amazing job of trying to control the chaos, but every time things get set up, there's either more explosions or more debris or more people come out of the rubble.
All right. Dan Cohen, a Fox News producer, also an emergency medical technician who has been in Lower Manhattan trying to help the wounded on this catastrophic day. We can't overstate the level of damage that's been inflicted here. It bears repeating, folks, that America is still standing. We are united, we are strong, and we will find out who did this. But for now, there are thousands, probably, of casualties in not only in Lower Manhattan, but also in Washington, D.C. Let's get the latest now from our Edie Donahue in the Fox newsroom. Edie?
Well, John, America may be standing, but we are certainly in shock. The Pentagon still in flames. Our own correspondent, David Schuster, there. An update now on exactly what happened this morning. The first shot came just about 8:50 Eastern time. That was when the first plane, an American Airlines plane that had been hijacked en route from Boston to L.A. with 92 people on board, slammed into the World Trade Center. We were just finishing up our morning show. We watched that and started speculating what was happening. Within 10 minutes, 15 minutes, the second plane had hit the second World Trade Center. That was the South Tower. That apparently, although it is not confirmed, United Airlines says it is missing Flight 175, which was en route from Boston to Los Angeles. Witnesses later say that they saw people from the top floors on fire, jumping to their death. At 9:45, the Pentagon was hit, the south wall, that apparently by American Airlines Flight 77 en route from Dulles, Washington, that is, to Los Angeles. That is a 757 plane. It was carrying 64 people. That ripped a 100 to 150-foot hole into the south ring, the south wall there, the outermost ring of the Pentagon. That, as we said, the fire sirens still wailing there, the Pentagon still on fire. At about 10 o'clock, 80 miles southwest of Pittsburgh, this United Airlines Flight 93 from Newark to San Francisco crashed. That's a 757 with 90 people on board. Now, what's interesting is that crashed just after the FAA ordered all United States commercial airliners to land at the closest possible place. Right after that order was issued, that plane crashed. Later on, the South Tower of the World Trade Center collapsed. The North Tower of the World Trade Center collapsed. We do know that some people, even as high as the 92nd floor, were able to be evacuated safely. In the U.S., for the first time in history, All United States commercial aircraft have been grounded. We know that some internationally inbound flights landed in Canada, but now Canadian airlines and airports have been shut down as well. All federal buildings and most state buildings across America have been closed, and most major landmarks in the U.S. are closed. In New York City, bridges, tunnels, subways all shut down. At St. Vincent's Hospital, where many of the first victims of the World Trade Center crash were taken, we have paramedics out on the street donating, soliciting blood from any donors they can find. They say the need is that great right now. As we say, right now, America seems to be in a quandary. We have had these attacks this morning. The president apparently is safe, but we do not know where he is. He has not made a statement since the official one this morning saying that this was a criminal act and that he would do everything to find out who had committed it. The enemy, though, at this point, unknown. No one has officially claimed responsibility. John, that's the latest. Back to you.
All right, Edie Donahue in the Fox Newsroom, thank you very much. It's not surprising that we haven't heard from the president yet. He took off from Florida, where his scheduled events have been canceled for the day. Took off from Florida probably around 9:30 this morning, and flying time to Washington being what it is, if in fact he is headed to Washington, we wouldn't expect to hear from him for some few minutes now. Let's get the latest on that from our Britt Hume, our Washington managing editor.
John, thank you. We are awaiting to hear when the president will land and exactly where, and when he might have something to say about all of this. A couple of things worth noting. Brian Wilson has just called to say that he was talking to Congressman Jim Moran, a Democrat of Virginia, who has received a briefing on Capitol Hill, and that Moran says that what they know about that plane crash near Pittsburgh was they believe that was related to an attempted attack on Camp David. Of course, you know where there was an earlier incorrect report that Camp David had in fact been attacked. All officials now are saying that is not the case. So we have a little bit more from what the intelligence community is apparently telling members of Congress. It appears also that fighter jets are now escorting Air Force One, which would be a standard precaution under a circumstance like this. The last time I can recall, in my own experience, this happening was when President Bush I flew down to a drug summit in the nation of Colombia, where, of course, terrorism is a constant threat. We're waiting, as we noted, for further word from the White House, where communications are obviously a problem because everybody's been evacuated as to where and when the president will land. So that is basically the latest we have from here. I might call your attention to a quote. This from Chris Yates, an aviation expert at Jane's Transport in London. Jane's, of course, is a company that publishes a number of defense-related and aviation and maritime-related publications, military-related publications. He called it the most audacious terrorist attack ever taken place in the world. There you go.
That cannot be
Rita
over.
Cosby, by the way, has something to report as well. Rita's been staying in touch with us by telephone. She's in our air. Rita, what do you know?
Well, Britt, I'm told by the FAA that at this point 22 international flights have been diverted to Canada, and there are 50 flights over the United States. Remember, we're in a full-fledged ground stop right now. This is the first time in U.S. history that they have done such a ground stop, but we are told that there are 50 flights still in the air trying to reach their locations here in the United States, ordered to land immediately. There are also 2 international flights from Europe in which the pilots have not responded, and that is drawing concern from U.S. These are flights that were en route to the United States from Europe, and the pilots have not responded to the FAA, so they're trying to find out if those 2 planes may be in trouble. Also, law enforcement sources are telling us, and this is interesting, that there was word put out through an Arab newspaper about 3 weeks ago that bin Laden himself, the mastermind behind the East African bombings, the embassy bombings there in East Africa, that he apparently did put out word about 3 weeks ago saying that he was planning an unprecedented attack against U.S. interests. Since that time, they got other information that there may be some sort of attack against U.S. possibly governmental facilities. And then, as we know, on Friday, the State Department did put out a worldwide caution basically telling U.S. Citizens and also particularly government and military officials that they should be in a heightened state of alert. But I will tell you from talking to law enforcement sources, I talked to them minutes after the 2 planes rammed into the World Trade Center building this morning, the Twin Towers, that they were very stunned, that they said, look, we had gotten word that there may be some sort of attack, but we had no idea it was going to be on U.S. soil, no idea that it was going to involve airliners and so forth. I will tell you also, law enforcement sources do know that Osama bin Laden, right now they believe he's sort of the prime suspect. They have no idea who's behind this, but they are looking at him because they do say that he and his men did a lot of training. In fact, where they did practice hijackings, where they did have pilots who were on their staff, and in fact, we had reported earlier that 3 people involved in the East African bombings were actually pilots, and that's sort of part of their training, and they get some of that in Afghanistan, also Iran, and a number of other countries. So this is sort of part of their training to prepare for something like this. But law enforcement sources are telling me, and these are intelligence officials, that they were really stunned by today's development.
All right, Rita, thank you very much. It's worth perhaps also adding to this, John Scott, that the North American Air Defense Command, NORAD, is controlling the U.S. aircraft that are in the air, including those that are escorting Air Force One. So you get an idea from that just how seriously this threat is being taken by the U.S. military. Back to you in New York, John Scott.
All right, Britt Hume, thanks very much. This was supposed to be an election day in New York. Primary elections were scheduled for mayor here and other offices. Those elections have been canceled. A couple of other more mundane matters considering all that's gone on. Major League Baseball has canceled its scheduled games for tonight. All those games are canceled. Let's listen to one of the witnesses from Lower Manhattan now recount what he saw. This is unedited tape. All right, we're having a little trouble hearing the audio there. As you can imagine, Wall Street workers, a great number of other people terrifically impacted by the collapse of the World Trade Centers, that after they were hit by 2 apparently hijacked airliners shortly before and shortly after 9 a.m. this morning Eastern Time. Oklahoma Governor Frank Keating is on the line with us once again. Governor, you have had more experience than anybody dealing with catastrophe of this scale in the bombing of the Murrah building. How should America respond?
Well, no one has had experience responding to a catastrophe of this scale. This is just agony beyond comprehension. It is horrific. It really is a day of infamy. And I am confident as a citizen, because I dealt with the New York Police Department and the New York Fire Service here in Oklahoma City, that they have first-rate authorities. Their emergency management people are first-rate. I'm confident in the military authorities and obviously in the President's leadership. But this is just absolutely
Governor, let me interrupt you for just a minute. Britt Hume has some late-breaking information for us out of
John,
Washington.
we've just learned from the White House press pool, that is the group of journalists who stay with the President at all times, fly with him aboard Air Force One, that the President will, in a matter of minutes, be making a statement. There is some mystery about exactly where that statement will come from, whether it will be from Air Force One or some other place where he may have landed. So we await, obviously, with great interest that, but we are within apparently minutes of hearing from the President for the first time since his initial remarks before he got in the air after these attacks originally occurred. So we wait here in Washington to bring that to you as soon as we have a signal from the White House or from wherever the President is.
And almost certainly, Britt, that would not be from the Oval Office. The White House has been evacuated, right?
The White House has been evacuated, and we have no reason to believe that the President's plane has touched down in the Washington area. But communications here are such, John, that all kinds of things could have happened that we don't know about, and indeed that not everybody here on the ground knows about. But the President, of course, travels with the most elaborate communications facilities. The President has, the latest word we have now is the President has touched down at Shreveport, Louisiana, and it is apparently from there that we will hear whatever he has to say. So we are awaiting we're awaiting a signal, a picture, and the words of the President of the United States coming from Shreveport, Louisiana, a place that the military apparently felt that the President was safe to go. So we are watching and waiting for that, John.
All right. Britt Hume in Washington, thanks very much. We will continue to await the words of the President when he gets to a television transmission facility, apparently, as Britt told you, there in Shreveport. Frank Keating, the governor of Oklahoma, still on the line with us. Governor, you've been in this position. You've had to calm a populace horrified by a sudden terrorist strike. What does the President need to say, and how do Americans need to take in this cataclysmic disaster?
Well, this is an attack, an act of war against the United States. In my case, it was a domestic terrorist attack. In this case, ostensibly, it's an international terrorist attack. I think the president will appropriately say the first thing we must do is rescue and recover. We must pray for those who are injured, pray for those who are killed, and anyone who did this, we will get them. Real simple, but focus first on rescue, recovery, and prayer, and I'm sure that's exactly what the president will do.
There is going to be a great uniting of America, isn't there, coming out of all this?
Well, yes, because this was an attack on us, and in that building, that is a melting pot of America. There are obviously thousands of people of all different walks of life, all different races, all different religions and nationalities there. And to make a political statement by destroying innocent men, women, and children is never acceptable in any moral society. And this is absolutely an affront to civilization, and the president and the country will be united and will respond accordingly, and appropriately so.
And an affront to civilization is just what you'll see in the pictures that we are about to bring you. Again, these are unedited. We cannot exactly predict what you're going to see because we haven't seen some of them ourselves. But this is video as one of the towers of the World Trade Center collapsed. You can see the sheer terror on the people as that shockwave of dust and debris rolls toward our camera crew there. And all of a sudden, it is midnight in downtown Manhattan as the crumbled concrete, as the shell of what was once Manhattan's proudest buildings, pair of buildings, as it crumbled to dust. And it is still burning, it is still on fire. Untold numbers of people are dead, untold numbers of people are trapped. The rescue effort is going to go on for days, perhaps weeks. Again, imagine the mindset of these people who were at the base of the building there, watching what they thought was nothing more than a fire. Nobody knew at this point that these buildings were going to collapse. I might bring into the conversation Howard Safir, the former chief of police, police commissioner here in New York City, also fire commissioner as well. Mr. Safir, nobody ever thought the World Trade Center would fall. I mean, that's what the terrorists tried to do back in 1993, and they weren't even close to being successful.
That's true, and even the engineer who designed the Trade Center had told me it was designed to withstand a commercial airliner attack. Obviously, that's not correct, but this is incomprehensible and just the kind of thing that, although we plan for every kind of terrorist attack, this is overwhelming for the emergency services in New York, which are some of the best in the world.
Let's look at the bigger picture. I mean, everybody wants to know who did this, but it's going to take some time, isn't it?
It is. I mean, this is obviously, and you know, it's not that it's time to worry about the people who are hurt and injured, but this is obviously an intelligence failure. We're going to have to figure out not only why we didn't have the intelligence, but we have to figure out how these hijackers were able to breach airport security and what we have to do to fix that.
It could be something relatively simple. If you wanted to, I mean, I have boarded airplanes before with my pocket knife, a 3 or 4 inch blade. That can be a lethal weapon, and nobody has ever stopped me. There are limits on what kind of a knife you can take on board, but a couple of trained terrorists, trained in hand-to-hand combat, could easily get into a cockpit and commandeer a plane.
Well, that is true. Also, the quality of personnel is very important. The technology is very important. And most importantly, the way you prevent terrorism is through intelligence. You can't prevent terrorist acts when they're taking place, but you need to have the intelligence so you know about them and prevent them before they take place.
Let's check in with Molly Falconer. She's in Lower Manhattan at St. Vincent's Hospital, a scene of absolute chaos. Molly, what's going on there?
John, it has been a scene of chaos all morning. This is a hospital under siege. It's taking many of the victims up from the World Trade Center. They're running out of blood. They're running out of something called Silvadene, which treats burns. They have been raiding local pharmacies and local stores to try and get that. And I'm standing here with Kim White, who managed to make it out of Tower 1 right before it went down. And you're saying you had a hard time with some of those fire doors.
Yeah, the fire doors were locked, and we couldn't get them unlocked. It took about 10 minutes for somebody to actually come and open up the doors, and then we were able to finally head down. But then there were other doors that were locked, so we were brought into another floor when there was another explosion, and they finally let us continue to go down.
And your clothes are in shreds, and you still got debris in your hair. Is that what happened to your colleagues, and how are they?
I have a rim which that's how we've been able to keep contact with one another.
Yes.
And I had my one of my male co-workers contact me when I was in the hospital and asked me and told me that he's with the entire team. Where am I? And I told him I was at the hospital, so everybody is doing okay.
How are people feeling, and could you see anything? Was there smoke all around you?
Well, when we got down to the bottom floor, we thought we were okay, and then there was a collapse. We don't know what collapsed. There was a collapse of something. The police and fire department told us to go run to the wall and don't look outside. Next thing we know, billowing black smoke just came in, and I mean, it went down my mouth, up my nose, all over the place, and people were hysterical at that time. You couldn't see anybody. You could barely see the lights of the flashlights that were downstairs. But eventually, I think they broke a plate glass window to Borders.
They were breaking glass to try and get out?
To try to get out to Borders bookstore, and we went through down their escalator and then up another escalator to come out, and that's how we finally got out of the office.
Okay. I'll let you go. Thank you very much for stopping. And John, we are hearing a lot of victims come, some staggering, out of this hospital. We've got reports that over 160 are inside. They've turned the corridors. They even turned the hospital gym into a makeshift ER. They have hundreds of doctors and nurses on call. Obviously, their disaster plans are in effect. They've sent several triage teams downtown. They have blocked off all of 7th Avenue, which is one of these main thoroughfares right in front of the hospital here, so that they can ferry ambulances from the World Trade Center to St. Vincent's Hospital. And all morning, all we've been seeing are gurneys out on the street standing at the ready for the hundreds of ambulances, I should say dozens of ambulances that are coming in, but who knows, there are no estimates as to how many will eventually get here. A spokesman named Mark Ackerman came out a few moments ago and said he can't put an estimate on how many people will be here, but we'll keep a watch on it for you all the time. Again, there is a call out for blood and something called Silvadene. It treats burns and infections. They have already raided the local pharmacies around the hospitals, and they're calling for more. Back to you.
All right, Molly Falconer at St. Vincent's Hospital in Lower Manhattan, thank you. We want to take you out to Los Angeles now. A couple of the planes that were hijacked were bound for Los Angeles. John Dupree, our correspondent there, has some late-breaking information for us. John?
John, the ripple effect of this disaster felt clear out here on the West Coast. Three of the planes which crashed today were bound for Los Angeles International Airport, where you find me now. American flight number 11 with 92 people on board, American flight number 77 with 64 people on board, and United flight number 175 with 65 people on board, which may have crashed into the Pentagon. All bound for Los Angeles International Airport. Their numbers were not even on the arrivals board here. No one had begun to come here to pick up passengers arriving from those two cities. Now, and only now, one by one, family members and loved ones beginning to show up here at LAX, being escorted into the corporate offices at American Airlines here at Terminal 4, being escorted by United officials to a nearby hotel, being briefed on what has happened, being told that their loved ones, their family members, by all appearances most likely dead. The skies above Los Angeles International Airport, where 150 to 250,000 people each day take off and land, the busiest airport on the west coast of these United States, eerily empty. That's the effect here on the other side of the country. John Scott, back to you.
John Dupree in Los Angeles, thank you. Again, these pictures just coming into us now. This is unedited video of the pandemonium, the fear, the chaos in Lower Manhattan as the Twin Towers, the World Trade Center, the tallest buildings in Manhattan, once the tallest buildings in the world, as they collapsed in an incredible shockwave of dirt, debris, smoke, and certainly a catastrophic loss of human life. This was the reaction there in Manhattan. Nobody ever thought those towers could fall. Almost certainly the terrorists who tried to inflict this didn't think they could fall. They perhaps hoped it would happen, but nobody thought there would be this kind of catastrophic damage. William Daley and Howard Safir. William Daley, a former FBI agent who investigated the first World Trade Center bombing, let's talk about the bigger picture once again. Sure, the terrorists wanted to inflict maximum damage, maximum loss of life, but their real goal is mental, isn't it? Aren't they trying to scare America?
That's true, John. In fact, my role was one after the incident in helping put security back in place for these once prestigious locations. And the thought is, when we do security planning and try to predict where terrorists will attack, we always think of what are the spots that are indicative of the American way, whether it's the World Trade Center, whether it's some other landmark, or what they call trophy building that they like to have exactly what we see here, be up in smoke, and for everyone to be panicked and concerned. So when we try to predict terrorist acts, we look at these, but we really, at the very far end of the spectrum, would think that would ever come down to something like this. We always looked upon something worst case, like vehicle bombs we saw in Oklahoma City, or we've seen over in Europe, individual bombings. But when we look at planes, flying bombs with people in them, which are of and by themselves would be catastrophic incidents if they occurred.
On any given day, any one of these incidents would dominate the news for weeks.
Exactly.
We've had 4 planes crash today, 3 of them deliberately into buildings, 2 at the World Trade Center towers, 1 at the Pentagon, and 1 went down in an airport area near Pittsburgh. Britt Hume is keeping an eye on the situation in the nation's capital. Let's get the latest from him. Britt?
Well, the first thing, John, is that fire at the Pentagon continues to burn out of control and going ever deeper into the building itself. One presumes that the building has been now evacuated of all but firefighting personnel. But that obviously a worrisome situation. There you see a live picture of the plume of smoke, black smoke still rising from the Pentagon. Evidently, the amount of fuel that was spilled or whatever was aboard that aircraft was sufficient to keep that blaze going apace. From Capitol Hill, we learned a couple of other things. Senator Jon Kyl, Republican of Arizona, said to our Brian Wilson just a short time ago that the leadership, members of the leadership are in various different, congressional leadership are in various different places, in touch with each other and with the administration. We have a plan, said Kyl, and it is in place. What that's all about remains to be seen. Brian also reports that at the Capitol Police Station, J.C. Watts, Tom DeLay, both were members of the Republican House leadership, had been seen there, as well as Democrats Dick Gephardt and David Bonnier. So members of the congressional leadership here in Washington, those 4 we know about and have been seen, and they are said all to be in touch with one another as we await remarks by the President of the United States, who is at Barksdale, or is either on the ground or is about to speak from Barksdale military base, Air Force base there outside Shreveport, Louisiana. As soon as that can be technically set up, we expect to hear from the President. We'll let you know.
All right, Britt Hume, keeping an eye on the things in Washington. Thanks very much. Howard Safir, again, this is something that New York City has planned for a long time. New York always thought it was an obvious terror target. You might say, in a way, we dodged a bullet back in '93 when the World Trade Center was bombed, 6 people dead, 1,000 hurt, but nothing on the scale of what we've seen today.
Absolutely not. This is incomprehensible. The idea of 1 plane was incomprehensible. The idea of 4 is beyond the realm of conception. And, you know, this is obviously something that was well planned, had to be well coordinated, had to be something that was planned for months, maybe even years. And, you know, finding the people who did this after the rescue operation, and we save as many lives as possible, is really the key here.
How is life going to change in America as a result of this, or is it too early to say?
Well, I think one of the things you're going to see is a re-examination of both our intelligence procedures and our security procedures. Certainly our airport security procedures are going to have to be put under a microscope and look for the vulnerability points, because four airplanes hijacked in one day says the system doesn't work.
Perhaps, Bill Daley, I'm just exploring some options here, but might we see almost armored cockpits from now on? I mean, those cabin doors, as anybody who's ever flown, are lockable but fairly flimsy. Excuse me, Bill, we want to go up to Shepard Smith, who's actually keeping an eye on things from the sky above Midtown. Shep?
I'm actually down in the newsroom now, John, and want to bring you an update on the facts as we've been getting them in the last few minutes. The FBI headquarters will be making an official announcement shortly. Fox News Channel will carry that for you as well. As Britt Hume mentioned, we are waiting at Barksdale Air Force Base, where President Bush is scheduled to address the nation in just a few minutes. It's our understanding that there are technical reasons that he's not on yet, but that should be happening shortly. I can also tell you that now the United States border with Canada has been shut down at all crossings. There is a report from Afghanistan now, from Kabul, Afghanistan. Osama bin Laden's people, and actually the Taliban now responding to this. Afghanistan's hardline Taliban rulers have condemned this devastating terrorist attack in New York and the one in Washington, and rejected suggestions that Osama bin Laden could be behind them. The Taliban's ambassador to neighboring Pakistan has now said that bin Laden, the Saudi dissident who has been given asylum in the country, does not have the facilities needed to carry out such an attack. Quoting now from the Taliban, "It is premature to level allegations against a person who is not in a position to carry out such attacks. It was a well-organized plan on connection with the 1998 bombings of the U.S. embassies in East Africa that killed 224 people." Now, there are reports that the victim count at the Pentagon is now at 34. Those are unconfirmed reports at this moment, but certainly with a fire that happened so quickly and an explosion on that level, fears at the Pentagon are certainly running high. We're also getting word from NASA now that astronauts aboard the International Space Station can actually see the smoke rising from Washington and New York. That this plume of smoke that was once the World Trade Center in New York City can be seen from 224 miles in the sky. And on the International Space Station, they are watching in what is certainly a day which will live in infamy, September the 11th, 2001, and the worst terrorist attack in the history of the world. The updates are coming in fast and furious now from individual states across the nation. Suffice it to say that governments across this country are now shutting down all major tall buildings. That's the way it seems, as we've just gotten reports from New Jersey across the river where they watch these buildings fall. The governor of Pennsylvania now asking to use a Fox News satellite truck to address the people of his state. Overwhelming calls now from governors and congressmen and senators for calm across the nation. The president soon to address the nation about how the United States will respond. David Schuster has been reporting throughout the day that the military is now on an alert, which is parallel with alert that would be in place should we be at war. Newt Gingrich saying earlier that this is likened to Pearl Harbor. President Bush will put it all into perspective for us shortly. Those are the latest updates as we have them. Once again, the FBI to make an official statement in just a matter of minutes. This from our correspondent there at the Pentagon. The president to speak down in Shreveport, Louisiana in just a few minutes. John, both of those for you live when they come in here in the newsroom.
All right, Shepard Smith in our newsroom, thanks very much. Again, to restate, you're looking at the place where the World Trade Center used to stand in Manhattan. A billowing cloud of smoke still rolling up from the foundations of the towers. They crumbled around, well, in the 10 o'clock hour. This after they were struck by two hijacked jetliners in separate incidents just before and just after 9 o'clock this morning Eastern Time. 50,000 people work in those buildings on a given day. It's certain that a good number of those people were already at their desks. Witnesses describe seeing people jumping from the upper floors in flames, preferring to make a quick end of their lives rather than suffer disastrously. Here is the picture of the second plane coming in. We are not exactly certain at this point which plane that was. It's believed that was the American Airlines Flight 77 from Washington to LAX. We believe that was the plane that was employed as a flying bomb to destroy the second of the World Trade Center towers. The structural steel in those towers, steel that was thought to be strong enough to withstand this kind of attack, ultimately gave way to the heat of the burning fuel from those aircraft. You can see there the pictures, people who have broken out the windows. They cannot breathe. They are leaning outside, waving handkerchiefs, towels, anything they can, waiting for rescue. Rescue that almost certainly never came. The towers crumbled one at a time, as you're looking at the replay here, in a tremendous shower of shattering glass and concrete. Almost certainly there will be casualties in neighboring buildings because the World Trade Center towered so tall above the buildings around it as it fell, there'd be steel beams, girders, chunks of concrete, enormous piles of material cascading down from 1,000 feet in the sky, a quarter-mile up, all of this material falling down to the ground, and anybody who was underneath it would have a difficult time surviving indeed. Also, we take you to Washington, where the Pentagon remains on fire, a fire burning out of control after a hijacked jetliner there slammed into the outer wall, the outer ring of the Pentagon. Now, this one could have been worse. We have early indications of perhaps 36 people dead, but it appears that the impact of that plane actually came on the ground outside the Pentagon. So the fire is still burning there, the Pentagon in flames. Clearly, this was an attempt to strike at America's financial structure, the symbol of America in many respects, the World Trade Center, the tallest, the most visible buildings in New York City, right alongside New York Harbor, and also a strike at the Pentagon, the center of America's military. Shepard Smith has a late update now from the newsroom. Shep?
John, we have just gotten this in from the World Trade Center explosions in New York City. The death toll is now estimated at 10,000. This out of New York, and this, according to the Pentagon, that there were undoubtedly deaths at the Pentagon as well. Representative Jim Moran, coming out of the Capitol Police headquarters, has just told Fox News on camera, again, he is a Democrat from Virginia, that the official estimate now is 10,000 have been killed in lower Manhattan as the World Trade Centers collapse to the ground. We're expecting to hear from the president shortly, John.
All right, Shepard Smith, thank you. And that death toll, suffice it to say, could certainly go up. There were thousands of people, perhaps, among them some of New York's finest and bravest police and fire officials, trying to effect the rescue of those people who were caught in the top of those buildings. At the time, we thought, and here you look at the replay of the plane slamming, this is the second plane now, slamming into the second tower, and the catastrophic explosion there that certainly killed everyone on board the plane, as well as probably hundreds in the World Trade Center towers. So there were firefighters and police officers on the ground trying to effect the rescue of those people above, and all of a sudden, both of the towers came cascading down around them. Clearly, a great number of the people whose lives have been lost today are the firefighters and the rescue crews who were trying to help save others. We are awaiting word from President Bush. He was in Florida at the time this all began. As you look at these unedited pictures of people scrambling away from the dust cloud resulting from the collapse of the World Trade Center. President Bush was on the ground in Florida. He was to address an elementary school on what was supposed to be an upbeat event promoting education in this country. President Bush is safe. Air Force One took him to Shreveport, Louisiana. We expect he will be addressing the nation momentarily. Once again, the U.S. military is on the highest state of alert. The kind of alert that would have emanated from the Pearl Harbor attack. And as former House Speaker Newt Gingrich said today on the air on Fox News, certainly this attack will bring with it more casualties than the American forces lost at Pearl Harbor. This is a 21st century Pearl Harbor. Experts have been saying for a long time that perhaps the military attacks of the future would be of this kind. And Bill Daley, former FBI agent, I guess this is the worst kind of scenario. This is what was predicted, but perhaps maybe never imagined?
It was predicted, imagined, but the countermeasures to ever deal with something like this were something you couldn't come to grips with. How are you going to stop commercial airliners from coming down routes around New York that they normally travel?
It's monumental, the scope of the catastrophe. Britt Hume is in Washington now with some more information for us.
Yeah, John, we just, as we've noted, that fire continues to burn at the Pentagon, but the Secretary of Defense, we now understand from Admiral Craig Quigley, his spokesman, who has just spoken to Fox News a short time ago, says that he is in the building, that he is in the National Military Command Center, which is a kind of bunker within the Pentagon, where it is said that communications are working. While the place is a little smoky, the Secretary never left the building. That threat condition Delta, which David Schuster earlier described to you as the most advanced threat condition there is, has been set for the Pentagon. Quigley seemed not to know when asked whether that was the military threat alert nationwide. But as for why it was imposed at the Pentagon, he said, quote, it was simply the prudent thing to do. I think most people would concur with that. The members of the congressional leadership, Brian Wilson reports from Capitol Hill, where he's been at the police station there, have been taken, it is said, to a secure location. We earlier heard from Senator John Kyle that said, yes, they are secure, they are in touch with each other, that the plan, at least for dealing with these things, as far as Capitol Hill is concerned, is underway and in effect. The FBI, John, is saying that they received no warning about this, no warning at all, and for that reason, obviously, that U.S. forces were not on any special alert. That's the latest from here.
All right, Britt Hume in Washington, thank you. As you look at these pictures of the smoking side of the Pentagon, it bears repeating that most of the building is still intact and even occupied. David Schuster was in the Pentagon for a good part of the morning. David, are you still inside the building?
John, we are. The pictures that you're looking, if you imagine the camera swinging to the left and going to the next concentric ring, that's where the media offices are, and that's where we are. We can tell you that the hallways, to give you an extent of how big the fire is that continues to rage out of control in many of the offices of the Pentagon on our side, which is clearly several hundred feet, or if not several hundred yards from where the fire is that you can see on the screen, the smoke is so thick that you really can't see down the hallway more than 20 feet in front of you. That's how thick it is. A short time a while ago, we saw 6 FBI agents walking down the hallway heading towards the part of the building where the plane crashed. We do believe now that the plane, in fact, that it was a direct hit on the south side of the building. Some of the local television pictures, when you look at them, you can see that there is a gaping hole at least 150 feet wide by the helipad. It does not appear that there are any marks on the grass in front, so it does seem as if the plane that struck the Pentagon did hit directly into the E-ring, the outside ring. At the moment, there are still at least, from our estimation, perhaps 20 to 30 offices over 4 floors that continue to burn out of control. The flames are shooting out the windows. The fire apparently continues to spread north along the building, north as far as the side facing Arlington National Cemetery. Again, the Pentagon has been evacuated, except as reported earlier, the National Military Command Center, which is where Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld is located. In addition, as far as the threat condition Delta, that applies to some of the Atlantic Fleet, some of the Air Command and Control, the groups that would coordinate U.S. military assets along the East Coast. Many of these assets will be used as far as civilian help, civilian efforts. Furthermore, we're told that all U.S. fighters in the United States are now on alert and are under control of the North American Air Defense System known as NORAD. This is a joint U.S.-Canadian system based in Colorado. Fighters were sent up and escorted Air Force One into Louisiana. But again, the situation here at the Pentagon, as you can see, the fire continues to burn out of control. One of the problems that firefighters are having is that it is very difficult, because of how big the Pentagon is, to get to some of the inner rings where the fire continues to burn. John?
All right, David Schuster at the Pentagon reporting live. Thank you. Again, apparently in that updated report from David Schuster, the Pentagon took a direct hit. Let's get another update now from Britt Hume in Washington.
Well, John, the latest thing we have, just quickly, is that we're hearing now from through the White House press pool and from our producer Nancy Harmeyer, who's still in Sarasota where the president was, but in touch, that the president has made the statement that he is going to make. He made it to tape. And that tape has been dropped off there at Barksdale Air Force Base, Barksdale military facility there on the Texas-Louisiana border near Shreveport. And he's now headed, we know not where, and that the tape is being ferried to a local broadcasting facility there. And you now see the situation there, some live picture from the Pentagon. Of officials there in the hall, and here is the president. This is the president to make this statement. This is Barksdale. This is tape, folks, not live. I'm sorry, folks. It appears there we saw the president start to come in. That, of course, was videotape, and that was a raw tape feed as it was coming in. It takes a while often for levels to be set and for everybody receiving to get clear that the picture and sound are coming in properly. And it is not uncommon at broadcast facilities when tape like this is being fed. We're going to have another go at it here now and see if this time we can hear this taped remark from the president.
Freedom itself was attacked this morning by a faceless coward
You see what's happening here. This is a videotape being fed from a remote location, and we're trying to get a clear signal and keep it from breaking up and get it onto the air. So sometimes this takes a little bit of time, and we will definitely do what we can to bring it to you as soon as we can see it and hear it clearly. That was the President of the United States. Here he comes again, same tape. See if we can hear it and see it more clearly this time.
Freedom itself was attacked this morning by a faceless coward, and freedom will be defended. I want to reassure the American people that the full resources of the federal government are working to assist local authorities to save lives and to help the victims of these attacks. Make no mistake, the United States will hunt down and punish those responsible for these cowardly acts. I've been in regular contact with the Vice President, Secretary of Defense, the National Security Team, and my cabinet. We have taken all appropriate security precautions to protect the American people. Our military at home and around the world is on high alert status, and we have taken the necessary security precautions to continue the functions of your government. We have been in touch with the leaders of Congress and with world leaders to assure them that we will do whatever is necessary to protect America and Americans. I ask the American people to join me in saying thanks for all the folks who have been fighting hard to rescue our fellow citizens, and to join me in saying a prayer for the victims and their families. The resolve of our great nation is being tested. But make no mistake, we will show the world that we will pass this test. God bless.
That concludes the press tape comments from Barksdale Military Base in Louisiana. The President of the United States speaking just a short time ago. We know not now where the President is. You heard him say that the United States military is on full alert. All security precautions could be taken, that he's been in touch with House, Senate leaders and other members of the administration, as well as with foreign leaders. He said we will hunt down and punish those who are responsible for what he called this cowardly act. That concludes Fox News Channel's presentation and Fox News' coverage of this presidential statement. Back to you in New York.
Britt, thanks very much. It bears repeating that apparently Camp David, the president's vacation residence there in Maryland, apparently was the target of another one of these attacks. We haven't talked about it a great deal today because apparently that attempt did not succeed. But there was a fourth airliner, besides the two that slammed into the World Trade Center and the one that slammed into the Pentagon, a fourth airliner, a United plane, slammed into the ground not far from, well, about 80 miles southeast of Pittsburgh. And the intelligence indications are that Camp David, the president's vacation residence, and it bears noting the place where the Camp David Accords were signed, signifying a possible peace deal between the Israelis and the Palestinians. Camp David was apparently one of the attacks. Bill Daley, former FBI agent who worked on the investigation following the first World Trade Center bombing back in '93, is still with us. Bill, there is so much symbolism that we will have to be alert for as we look at the causes of what has happened today, right down to the names of the airlines involved, United and American.
You know, John, I think as we take a step back, and certainly we're all reeling from the shock of the first, few moments of this, which we're still into, and the recovery. When we look at what actually has happened and to the design that has gone into this, by using domestic carriers, as you mentioned, ones that carry our own flag on it, crashing into symbols of our way of life.
Let me interrupt you, Bill, because we are going to.
Any questions that you might have.
This is a spokesman from American Airlines.
Today's events appropriately need to be addressed to the FBI.
And again, Al, you can't confirm which plane went into what.
I cannot,
side.
not at this point.
And it makes it difficult for you to release any information.
Right, it's just impossible at this point.
But Al, you did get a warning apparently this morning that something was amiss.
Well, again, every aspect of the investigation is being handled by the FBI, and they will respond to any questions you might have about the investigation.
How is American Airlines handling this in terms of operations, getting passengers off planes that are stuck on planes?
We are in total control of total contact with the federal government about every aspect of it, and working with the federal government on every aspect of it.
When relatives dial that 800 number, what will they be told, Al?
Well, we'll deal with them. We have procedures for dealing with them and doing the best we can to assist them.
Can you tell us if all your planes are on the ground?
At this point, I can't.
And what's the sense around here? Clearly, it's a terrible tragedy for your company. What's the sense in this building today?
Well, obviously, it's a matter of deep regret that the incident occurred, and we are working completely with the FBI on every aspect of the investigation.
Did you ever think you'd see something like this?
Well, this is an extraordinary circumstance, certainly.
Is it anything you all tried to prepare for?
Well, it's just, there's no way to prepare for something like this.
Al, I'm sorry, did you say all American flights were on the ground?
Well, we are working with the federal government to ascertain that at this point. So, well, there's nothing much more I can provide at this episode. If we have anything more that we can provide, we'd be delighted to do that. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Al.
So there you hear from a spokesman for American Airlines. 2 of its planes apparently involved today. 2 United airplanes also involved today in strikes against the World Trade Center, the Pentagon, and possibly an attempted strike against Camp David in Maryland, the presidential retreat. As you look at live video of U.S. Air Force fighter planes that are now circling New York as well as Washington, D.C. Shepard Smith has some late-breaking information now for us from the Fox Newsroom. Shepard.
A wealth of information coming in, John. I can tell you now that the United States military has dispatched 2 warships and the National Guard to report immediately to New York Harbor to help in what will be the largest in-country rescue effort in the history of this nation, no doubt. To repeat our earlier information from Representative Jim Moran, Democrat of Virginia, who came out of the Capitol Police Headquarters, and said on camera an estimated 10,000 people are dead in New York City, and says the attack on the Pentagon, there were undoubtedly deaths as well. The fire at the Pentagon still quoted as being out of control in the words of those there trying to put it out. This information from the West Bank city of Nablus, where we now have reports and videotape coming into Fox News Channel, where thousands of Palestinians are this day celebrating Tuesday's attacks, chanting "God is great," and distributing candy to passersby. The Taliban has made a statement as well, saying that it is not right to be putting this off on Osama bin Laden at this moment, that he does not have the resources available to do such a thing, and the Taliban there has itself condemned today's attacks. President Bush and a handful of aides were whisked away by motorcade from Capitol Hill. Mrs. Bush, that is. Mrs. Bush, the First Lady, and a handful of aides whisked away by motorcade from Capitol Hill, where she was to have testified at a Senate Committee on Education, to a hideout now, the First Lady in a hideout away from the White House. There, the sequestered group huddled around a single television in their hideout and channel surf for the latest news. You may be hearing a broadcast going off within our building. We are now in a 45-story building, the News Corp building, and we are hearing on overhead that the New York City Police Department is requesting that all non-essential personnel in the building be evacuated immediately. Here is the situation now. It's my understanding that these evacuations are happening in high-rises across New York City. 50,000 people scheduled to work this day in the Twin Towers. Hundreds of thousands more across the city, and all of the skyscrapers in the city of New York are now being evacuated. The problem with that is the subway systems are down. Traffic is almost non-existent. We travel here by cabs, which are not on the streets. John Scott, back to you in New York.
Fred Smith, thank you. I want to bring in somebody who has kept an eye on this kind of situation over the years. Bill Richardson, the former Energy Secretary and UN Ambassador, is joining us by telephone. Secretary Richardson, this is an appalling development. I can only ask for your gut-level reaction, and what should America's reaction be?
Well, first we have to support the President, who I think made a very, very important statement that we're not going to tolerate this. We have to pray for the victims. I think this is a time when the country needs to come together. This is an unbelievable tragedy. It looks like the work of Osama bin Laden, who I had tried to extradite several years ago from Afghanistan as UN ambassador. It's a coordinated attack. I think we have to get the best intelligence we can from our allies and friends around the world, and then basically plan a huge, massive response against these perpetrators.
Well, as you say, you have tried to get him extradited before. The U.S. has been pressuring the Taliban to give him up for years. What further pressure can we bring to bear?
Well, I believe that the first thing we need to do is penetrate those terrorist cells to find out exactly where he is. We need a massive response against him there. Secondly, we have to raise the stakes in the international community to initiate sanctions if nations don't cooperate in extraditing him to the United States or finding him. This man is a menace to the international community, not just to the United States. And thirdly, I believe that we have to bring the international community, our allies, developing countries, in a war against terrorism. Terrorism hits across borders, and there has to be an international, perhaps United Nations response, a coordinated response to prevent this from happening again. This is a massive attack on the United States, but also on the international community.
Bill Richardson, the former United Nations ambassador, thank you. As we continue to keep an eye on the skies over Manhattan and in Washington, D.C., people are nervous, understandably, when they hear jets fly overhead, and many of the jets that are flying now are military fighters. On alert there, the Air Force and presumably the Navy as well have military aircraft patrolling the skies over the nation's capital and also New York City. Probably several of the other major cities as well. Let's go to one of our correspondents in Washington, D.C., Rita Cosby, who has some late information for us. Rita?
John, I've been talking to intelligence sources for a few hours, and the last thing that they said to me was all signs are strongly pointing to Osama bin Laden. One intelligence, this is a senior official at an intelligence agency, told me that on June 20th of this year, bin Laden released a video to his followers saying, quote, "It's time to penetrate America and Israel and hit them where it hurts the most," signaling that he may plan some sort of attack on U.S. soil. In addition to this, John, they're also looking at who would have had the capability, who would have had the motivation. They said in recent weeks there has been a lot of activity on Islamic chat rooms talking about threats against the United States. But in terms of actual training for Osama bin Laden, he does own a number of planes, also trains specific pilots to actually be able to carry out these type of attacks. And this is something that intelligence sources are saying that they were aware he was doing this type of training, not necessarily to attack the U.S., but to train for suicide attacks on planes and other mechanisms. He also, as we know, is believed to be behind the attack of the USS Cole. And, of course, that was someone who came up on a boat and planned a suicide attack in that mechanism. They do believe, however, if he is connected to this, and, again, this is just a strong possibility that they're looking at, that he would have been augmented by another group. They said that, of course, he has widespread tentacles across the world and has followers across the world. And among the possibilities that could have, that they're looking at right now is augmenting would have been a Palestinian group and also the Hezbollah.
All right, Rita Cosby, this is just an absolutely stunning day. I still cannot get accustomed to the pictures that you're seeing there on your screen now. This is a looking, well, we were seeing Lower Manhattan. Now, this appears to be the area around Reagan National Airport in Washington. Hard to say. We'll find out what these pictures are specifically, but fighter jets now patrolling the skies over Manhattan as well as over Washington, D.C. There is the picture where you should see the World Trade Center standing tall and proud, but they are gone. 50,000 people scheduled to work in those buildings today. We don't know yet how many of them were able to get out but the estimates are that 10,000 are dead. Hard to wrap your mind around a number like that. 10,000 dead. We suspect that the number is going to go higher than that. Brit Hume is in Washington, D.C. Brit?
John, some senior members of Congress, members of the Senate in particular, have been heard now on what they think the congressional response ought to be. Republican Senator John Warner, who is the ranking member of the Armed Services Committee, said just a short time ago that he believes that the Congress needs to meet tomorrow or as soon as possible in some place. He also assures Washingtonians and those working in this city that there is a military air cap over Washington, D.C., which means that there are warplanes in the skies that will not allow any unauthorized plane near the city. That should be of some comfort to those who have been wondering whether a further attack from the air might be on the way or indeed possible. Senator Joseph Biden, the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, told our Brian Wilson just a short time ago that he believes that Congress should meet tomorrow and that that Congress should meet in the Capitol building to show that business goes on. And that is something obviously the leaders of Congress are considering very urgently. Now, one of the things that we should point out here, when you see the president touching down at an Air Force base at an unknown, or at least previously unknown location, dropping off a videotape, having taped a statement there and moving on, is that at times like these, the security becomes very tight, and security officials exercise maximum authority and get control of the situation. And after all that has happened, one can only imagine how extensive and how sweeping they want the further security precautions regarding the president and anyone around him to be. So I think we're probably in for some more mystery about the whereabouts of the president of the United States for some time now, because in a situation like that, security becomes the ultimate, the only, almost the only priority, and that will govern a great deal of what happens. Back to you, John.
Britt, I know we're all grabbing for information here, and it's coming in bits and pieces, but do you know anything about that plane crash that apparently there is talk of a plane crash perhaps directed at Camp David? How close did it come?
That is what members of Congress coming out of briefings are saying, that the plane crash near Pittsburgh. Now, Pittsburgh is up in the, Pittsburgh, of course, is some distance from Washington, but it is north and west of Washington, as indeed Camp David is north and somewhat west of Washington. And so if a plane were headed south and east out of Pittsburgh or in that region, that would be a likely place for it to, that would be a likely area for it to be in, or for it to be in that region. So members of Congress are told that intelligence officials believe that that's exactly where that plane was going when it crashed in that area. So that is obviously what they're thinking, that the Camp David retreat may have been under attack. And the Camp David retreat, by the way, is easier to hit than the White House. The White House is really not in anybody's normal flight plan or flight plane. That's not true at the Pentagon. The Pentagon is located just cheek by jowl with Washington National Airport, so a plane could be headed for what looks like a normal approach to Washington National Airport, veer off at the last minute and crash into the Pentagon, which appears to be what's happened. That would be more difficult to do with the White House. If a plane appeared to be on a flight path there would be jets scrambled. It would be harder to accomplish. Camp David, though, on the other hand, is another matter.
And I can't help but wonder, Britt, about the possible symbolism of a strike at Camp David, the place where, after all, the Camp David peace accords were signed.
Absolutely, the Camp David peace accords being signed there. And, of course, it is a symbol of the President of the United States. It is a place where he goes as a retreat. It is thought of as a safe and secure place. The symbolism of that would not be lost on the world either.
All right. Brit Hume again in Washington. Thank you very much. Newt Gingrich, Fox News contributor, the former Speaker of the House, is also joining us once again. Newt, you have a lot of high contacts at high levels of government. What is the thinking about the responsibility at this point, or is it too early for that?
I think it's way too early for people to have sorted this out. I think the first reaction is to, as Britt pointed out, is to make sure the President and the leadership is safe. The second reaction is to make sure that we save as many lives as we can, that we focus on the rescue effort. And I think you'll see coming out of this in 24 to 48 hours a much more focused effort to then begin to look at who did it, how do we get at them, how do we hit them hard enough that nobody ever tries to do this again. But I think it takes some time. This is an enormous shock, and the system, I think, takes a little while to get in gear. I must say, though, that to hear members of Congress complain about the intelligence service when the budgets have been too small, when for the last 25 years we've adopted rules that were tighter and tighter and stricter that made it virtually impossible for the American intelligence agencies to penetrate these kind of groups. I think that if the Congress really wants to be helpful, they need to pass some immediate action that strengthens our intelligence capability, and instead of playing a blame game, they need to take some responsibility for strengthening and enhancing our intelligence. And then I think the administration has to reach out around the world and make quite clear that we are going to go after whoever did this, and that people can decide either to be with the terrorist or to be with the Americans, but there's not going to be any middle ground, and there's not going to be any neutrality in the process of getting even. This will turn out to be vastly worse in human life than Pearl Harbor, and we have to keep refocusing. This is an act of war. This is not an accident. It's not an act of God. This is an act of war deliberately created by a group of people who were determined to hurt the United States.
And yet they could be a relatively small group. How do you strike back at a country when you may not be able to pin down exactly who within that country?
Let me say flatly, I don't believe this was done by a relatively small group. I don't think you could have trained and prepared for this mission. I don't think without sanctuaries, without people who were protecting them, without safe areas, without training camps, this was not prepared in a couple of mobile homes by a handful of fanatics. This is a well-financed, systematic act and could not be sustained without the support of some very major states. And we have to make clear that we will not tolerate any nation harboring training grounds, preparation areas, or known fugitives, and that we will exert whatever level of pressure and force is necessary to get those people released. Bin Laden has been a known opponent of the United States for 8 years. And we have not exerted the kind of pressure we're capable of. This is an act of war against the American people, against freedom, as the President said. And I think we have to react on behalf, as we did in 1941 after Pearl Harbor. We have to react with total effort to make sure that this doesn't happen again.
Newt, I know that you are a historian. Perhaps you can fill us in a bit later about reaction financially throughout America and the world after Pearl Harbor. But let me bring in now our managing business editor, Neil Cavuto, who is here. Neil, all of the stock markets continue to be closed today, correct?
Right. The first was talk that they would open later. They decided not to open at all. Trading in Europe has now since stopped. The markets there were hit and hit hard. It's probably a good thing in retrospect the markets never opened here. They would have collapsed at the open, anywhere from a 300 to 500 point opening had that occurred. Of course, this is the financial center of the world here, not just the New York metropolitan area in the United States, but of the world. This was the home of Morgan Stanley Dean Witter. It takes up about a tenth of the lease space in those two towers that are now no more. We should also emphasize that the New York Mercantile Exchange is here. A great deal of oil and gold, even some currency trading, was done out of these buildings. It is also interesting to note that as this all hit the fan, the dollar was tumbling here as the world markets began to sense from this that the United States was in serious, serious trouble, and then this bastion of security was maybe in some doubt. Typically in times of strife, people run to the dollar as sort of a safe haven. They did just the opposite today, and not surprisingly, because terrorism hit our shores. We should also point out some of the reverberations from this. We have not gotten any indications from the New York Stock Exchange or the NASDAQ or any of the financial markets if or even when they're going to open anytime soon. The feeling seems to be that they might resume sometime tomorrow, but again, that is not a given. We should emphasize here as well that this is very much royal trading abroad. All the major markets were down appreciably before they shut for business, anywhere from 5% to 7% losses on concerns that the world's greatest superpower has a terrorist problem on its hands. Now, where has that money been going? Interestingly enough, it's lifted the price of oil. There's a serious concern that we might go tit for tat into the Middle East on concerns whether this is Osama bin Laden or some Middle Eastern terrorist group, and that this might lift oil prices as a result. We should say that at last check, Oil had shot up better than $6 a barrel, now to close to $32 a barrel. So the financial pain, besides the obvious physical pain, could be quite pronounced. And it's something we're watching very closely for you, because if the intent here was symbolic, that is going after a United Airlines plane and an American Airlines plane, then also attacking the financial mecca of the universe was just as symbolic and perhaps longer term more telling. Rick Leventhal was literally in the center of the storm. He joins us now out of downtown New York with the latest. Rick.
Well, it's an eerie scene. It's almost eerily quiet now, except for an occasional ambulance flying by. And just a short time ago, we saw some doctors in scrubs heading on small vehicles towards the World Trade Center, which is still, or what's left of it, still smoking down the street here. The police have cordoned off the entire area surrounding it. The only vehicles passing through now are police cars, fire trucks, and ambulances, and construction vehicles like that. We just had a fleet of ambulances head into the scene. They were staged behind us here. They just went in, which suggests that perhaps they're getting closer to the base of the World Trade Center, where there might be many injured waiting to be rescued, in fact. And joining us now is a former detective with the New York City Police Department, worked with the Commissioner's Office. I know you're very familiar with crisis management. Tom Ruskin just came back from the base of the World Trade Center. Describe for us what you saw there.
There's a lot of fire, a lot of debris. The facade of the World Trade Center is all brought down and hanging there in an eerie type of site that you would expect to see in a movie. Fire is burning around it. Emergency crews are staged in the area but can't get close to it because of the fire and the chance that the debris may come down.
What can we expect to happen next?
Well, after they search for survivors, possible survivors, what will happen is the FBI will take over the investigation. The FBI will launch a massive investigation, as the President has told us this morning, which will definitely go up to Boston, where the planes originated, and thereafter go wherever the trail may lead.
You're familiar with the way the city handles these types of terrorist attacks. You handled the last bombing at the World Trade Center. What's going on right now in the hearts and minds of New York City's finest?
Well, what's going on is trying to rescue those people who may be left behind underneath the rubble, around the area, people who have been hurt. Hospitals have gone to a full state of alert in their triage areas. A block from here, we have a firehouse that is acting as a triage area so people can go in there and be treated with medical personnel. The city is on a high state of alert relative to the medical casualties that we may have.
Do we have to work under the assumption that this is not the end? Is that the way the police department and everyone, all the other agencies handle this?
Well, the military has gone on their highest state of alert. We don't know if it's over. We don't know. We know that all planes have been grounded throughout the country at this point in time, and thereafter each step that has been planned for will take effect.
A lot of people might say, well, New York City should have been ready for this. The police department, everybody else should have known that something like this might happen. Was the department prepared? Did it have a plan in place?
The city constantly trains and retrains. The Office of Emergency Management does nothing but train and retrain and get ready for something like this. But we live in a very free society where our gates are open, where people come in and visit. Terrorism has always been a possibility in the United States because we don't live under the tight control of other countries. So a plane hitting the World Trade Center or two planes hitting the World Trade Center was something that could happen. They are trained for it. I don't think that anyone would ever expect it to happen. Two planes in one day in one city, another plane to hit the Pentagon, another plane to crash in Philadelphia.
All right, Tom Ruskin, thanks a lot for joining us. We're hearing that there's a run on a lot of grocery stores in New York City, Upper East Side in particular, where people are starting to panic and thinking they might not be able to get food and supplies and that sort of thing. And obviously the message is not to panic and not to take these kinds of actions. Also, I want to point out they're looking for blood. They need blood donors, and they're asking people if you're able to donate blood to go to a number of locations in New York City to do just that. So something that everyone should think about. Reporting live in Lower Manhattan, I'm Rick Leventhal. Now back to you.
All right, Rick, thanks very much. Let's get an update now from Shepard Smith in the Fox Newsroom. Shepard?
John, I want to get you updated on a lot of information that has been coming through. This now coming from the Associated Press, which has just been handed to me. An update coming from AP with editor of a London-based Arabic newspaper saying he received a warning from associates of Osama bin Laden but did not take them seriously. Also, a news conference by airport officials is underway in Pittsburgh. The governor of Pennsylvania will be addressing his state in just a moment through the facilities of Fox News. I also want to let you know we know more about the president's travels today. You may remember as all of this happened, President Bush was in Florida waiting for an education conference. He was flown then immediately. They put him in the air initially with no initial decision about where he would go. They took him to a very high altitude, according to reports. His jet, Air Force One, was accompanied by and flanked by U.S. military fighter jets. Then a decision was made to put him down in Shreveport, Louisiana, where he made the statement. I can tell you that he has now spoken with Mrs. Bush, who is in a bunker, as it is being described, a hideout bunker huddled around a single television set in this hideout, channel surfing for the latest news, according to one person who was in there during the time. Osama bin Laden's name has been mentioned here. The Taliban has said throughout the day, rejecting claims that Osama bin Laden may have been involved. There is dancing in the streets in one city on the West Bank, it is now being said. We have videotape, as a matter of fact, which we are efforting to get into New York and should have here shortly, of them handing out candy in the streets and saying that God is dead. Now, this as an aside, in June, a United States judge had set this Wednesday, tomorrow, as the sentencing date for a bin Laden associate for his role in the bombing of a U.S. embassy in Tanzania that killed 213 people. So an associate of bin Laden would have been sentenced tomorrow in Manhattan at a courthouse just across the street from the World Trade Center. No one from the U.S. Attorney's Office could be reached today to comment on whether the sentencing is still on. In the West Bank city of Nablus, thousands of Palestinians celebrating now, chanting God is great, distributing candy to passers-by. As we speak at this moment, the death toll continues to rise in Lower Manhattan. We had a quote earlier this day from a man, a senator, actually a congressman, who had been inside Washington, D.C. police headquarters. He is a Democrat from Virginia, Representative Jim Moran, who came out of the Capitol Police headquarters and said to our cameras, the estimated death toll now 10,000 out of New York, and says the attack on the Pentagon, that there were undoubtedly deaths as well. The Pentagon still on fire as we speak in Lower Manhattan, still working to clean up the mess and find any potential survivors. Rick Leventhal mentioned just a moment ago this idea that there are fears, at least, that panic may spread. Rest assured, in much of the city of Manhattan, there is some degree of edgy calm. There are not streets, there are not cabs in the streets. There are not cars making their way around. The bridges and tunnels to this island city are shut. You have to realize, as sentiment goes against Osama bin Laden, the people who drive those cabs have suddenly made themselves scarce. There is no public transportation to speak of aside from buses in Manhattan. The subways are shut down. The major buildings, at least in our area in the center of Manhattan, have just been ordered by the New York City Police Department to be evacuated of all non-essential personnel. So the situation as we know it now is this. The tens of thousands of people who work in skyscrapers, which were not leveled today, have been coming out of those skyscrapers into the streets with no way of getting transportation anywhere else within the city and no way to exit the city of Manhattan. Therefore, they gather on street corners, talking on cell phones. Outside 54th Street, just down the street from here. We could see them at 42nd Street from the roof of our 45-story building here. Outside all the major points where transportation would normally be available. Grand Central Station, the gateway to New York City by subway and by train. Penn Station, where buses were coming in, all shut down. And again, a plea for calm. So many of these people who are sitting around in Manhattan with nothing to do are urged now to donate blood because the situation in Lower Manhattan requires that a lot of blood come forward. We are getting reports from every state in the United States now, repeated ones through the Associated Press, about the way each state is now reacting. All government headquarters now on high alert. We are on Delta alert right now in the United States, which means our military is at a level as if war had been declared against the United States. There is no higher state of alert in the United States of America than is underway right now. Delta. David Schuster's at the Pentagon, keeping watch there. Rick Leventhal in downtown Manhattan. As the facts come in, we'll bring them to you from the newsroom. John, back to you.
All right, Shepard, thanks very much. Want to get an update now from Lower Manhattan. Molly Falconer is at St. Vincent's Hospital, where the dead and injured are being taken. Molly?
It's a terrible scene here, John. Over 300 people have volunteered to go inside and give blood. Hundreds are coming in here to St. Vincent's Hospital, treating for everything from heart attacks to smoke inhalation to severe burns. And I'm here with Dr. Robert Lurch, who's been inside all day. Can you tell us what's been going on?
Basically inside there's all types of injuries, from very minor injuries to very serious injuries. The hospital is very well organized. People are being triaged into the appropriate situations, whether it be a minor cut or an abrasion or asthma or heart attacks or stroke or whatever.
Have you got what you need, and is there a sense of panic or is it calm?
No, I think everything is basically under control. There's every imaginable specialist in there. People are just waiting to do whatever they can, and things are very well taken care of at this point.
Okay. Is there anything you can tell us about what patients can do? Can people volunteer? Can they come here to ask about loved ones? It's obviously a scene that's been in chaos.
Unfortunately, at this point, I don't think really anybody knows anything.
Okay.
At this point, people are just being taken care of, and as far as in a global sense, how many people are hurt, how many people, no one has a clue.
Okay. Thank you very much. We'll let you go back to your work. Okay. Family members can call St. Vincent's Hospital. Press conference is going to go on around 3 o'clock today, and a list is being compiled and released. Nothing is formal yet. All is in chaos. We'll keep a watch on it here. Back to you.
Molly Falconer, thanks very much. The mayor of the city of New York, Rudy Giuliani, is on the phone with us now. Mr. Mayor, do we have any idea yet the number of casualties?
We don't know the number of casualties. We know it's going to be a large number of people that were seriously injured and that died. And there's no way at this point of knowing or even focusing on that. The effort right now is to save as many people as possible. And we have thousands of emergency workers doing that right now. And we have, from the police department, the fire department, the emergency services, the governor has alerted and put on standby the National Guard, and they should be able to relieve us later this afternoon. I believe that's going to be a number like 1,500, 1,700 National Guard. And we also have the urban search and rescue teams, 3 of them, that are coming to New York to help assist our police department and our fire department. So that's really the focus right now has to be.
I hate to
how many people can we rescue?
Right. I hate to wonder how many of your people, how many police and firefighters were there around the base of the Twin Towers when they began collapsing.
I am very worried about them, and saw some of them rush in and go in, and was with them. We were in a building that was trapped for a while, so when we left, I could see that they were going to. There's no question there are going to be significant casualties to our emergency personnel. It's terrible.
What do you say to the residents of New York City right now? Clearly, Manhattan has been locked down. The transportation in and out is shut off.
First of all, anyone in southern Manhattan should just head north. Just get beyond Canal Street, even further north. Not only is it safer because the smoke condition is still very bad, but it will help us in the emergency efforts if we clear out southern Manhattan, Canal Street south. Everyone should just leave and walk out and walk north, and therefore we'll be able to get the hundreds and hundreds of ambulances that we have to get in and then take people to emergency hospitals out as fast as possible so we can save as many lives as possible. To the rest of the people in the city of New York, just pray. And things are safe and things are secure right now, and let's keep hoping and praying that the casualties are kept to the smallest number possible.
We've put out the appeal, Mr. Mayor, for blood donations from people nationwide, but what else can people do to be helpful?
Anyone that has emergency techniques or emergency expertise can volunteer. Volunteer at the local hospitals. Volunteer to give blood. We're gonna need blood. We have over 170 hospitals in the city of New York. We're going to utilize virtually every single one of them, and the hospitals in the surrounding areas. So anyone that believes that they can donate blood, I'll give you at least one location: 153 East 53rd Street. That's 66th in Amsterdam. The Red Cross actually is at 66th in Amsterdam, so people can volunteer there, or they can go to 153 East 53rd Street and give blood. That would help a great deal. The hospitals are going to need blood. If people have medical backgrounds and they volunteer at the hospitals, that would help, particularly later this afternoon, when the people working there is just on the phone with St. Vincent's Hospital that's obviously great stress because they're right there. They're the closest hospital. But every hospital is going to need help.
We've had reports, Mr. Mayor, and I don't want to overstate this, but there has been reports from some of our people in the field of a sense of panic beginning to build, of a run on groceries and so forth. What can you do to calm down?
There's no reason at all for anyone to panic. The airspace around New York City is now secure. The federal government has cut off any flights. The fact is that the city of New York is safe right now. It's secure. People should not panic, and they should just go about their lives, and they should have confidence in America and in American democracy. We're going to overcome this, and we're going to prevail. We're going to find out. I'm sure our government's going to find out who did it, and we're going to make an example of them.
You know, of course, there was the mayoral primary and other primaries here in the city of New York. Those have been, we understand, canceled for a day.
Governor Pataki and I decided about 2 hours ago that it did not make sense today to have an election going on. Among other things, we needed the police personnel that are used during the primary to focus on this rescue effort and assisting each other.
Where were you when this terrible episode began?
Well, when I first was notified, I was in Midtown Manhattan, and I rushed down and saw a good deal of it with my own eyes. Saw the damage that was done to the World Trade Center. Saw people jumping from the top of the building. And then we were in 75 Barclay Street, where we set up a temporary command post, and then we were hit by the debris from the collapse of the Trade Center, and were trapped in the building for a short while, then had to evacuate.
75 Barclay Street, is that your command center?
That actually was a ground floor area right next to it. We were using a ground floor area as a temporary command center so that we could be close to where the rescue efforts were taking place. And as we were setting up, and we were on the phone talking to the governor and the White House, and the building collapsed, and we had to evacuate through the basement. It was pretty dicey for a while.
From your long years of experience at the Justice Department, you are not only familiar with trying to govern Manhattan, but also familiar with the operation of terrorist cells. What do you say to the people who inflicted this terrible attack on America?
I have no doubt that we're going to find out who's responsible for this, and that we're going to make an example out of them. And I believe that ultimately the strength of American democracy will prevail. We have to have confidence in ourselves now, and we have to have a sense that our government, a government of democracy and laws, is the future of this world, not this kind of horrible, awful, inhumane way of acting. And I'm sure we'll find out who's responsible for it and make an example out of them.
Rudy Giuliani, the mayor of New York City, joining us live by telephone. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
We know you have much to do today. It'll be a sleepless night and mostly a sleepless week for you, I'm sure, but thank you for taking the time to be with us. Once again, the mayor's words there. If you have medical specialties, if you can in some way contribute to the rescue effort, you're asked to report to your hospital. To be able to do that, ordinary citizens can donate blood at any hospital in the New York area or any of the blood centers that are already established. But please stay away from Lower Manhattan if at all possible. We're joined now by Marine Colonel Oliver North, former Marine Colonel Ollie North, who can give us some of his perspective. Ollie, a lot of people, Newt Gingrich among them, are saying that this is the 21st century Pearl Harbor. Do you agree?
Oh, it's far worse than Pearl Harbor, John. What we've got is a vicious attack on the United States. Interestingly enough, I was on my way back here from Detroit on what may well have been one of the last flights to get off the ground before all U.S. air travel was grounded. Our flight was due to land at National Airport, Reagan National. We were diverted to Dulles. I got a cab driver who was from, of all places, Afghanistan. Paid him heavily. Fox will pick up the tab for that, to get me back here into town. Several remarkable things, John. In spite of the attack here on Washington, remarkable calm as people were courteous but moving quickly to get out of the area. The attack on the Pentagon had activated all of the local law enforcement emergency rescue, to include the Fairfax fire and rescue experts, who are now, I'm told, being prepared to go to New York to assist in any recoveries that can be made up there. As you know, there are experts that worked on the first World Trade bombing and, of course, Oklahoma City. I'm also told that the attack that may have been aimed not at Camp David but at the National Military Command Center, Fort Detrick, Maryland, the attack that apparently brought down a plane near Somerset, Pennsylvania. And finally, there is talk already here in Washington of postponing or indeed canceling the International Monetary Fund and World Bank conference here at the end of the month, which was scheduled for Washington, and which the city was girding for. In fact, went through an emergency drill last week, which may well have helped some of the response here at this end. No doubt that this is the worst attack against the United States that we have ever experienced. My sense is, John, that there's going to be a call not to treat this as a crime, but to call it what it is, a war, and it may be a call for the Congress to do just exactly that, to make a declaration of war.
Ollie North, thank you. Stay with us if you would, please. Let's get some thoughts on that from another man who knows more than a thing or two about declarations of war. Al Haig, the former general and also former Secretary of State. Is it time to be talking about that? Is it time to declare some kind of a war here, Mr. Secretary?
Well, the terrorists have declared war on us for a number of years now. We simply haven't treated it as a war. I'm sure this very shocking and horrible day will certainly energize that kind of thinking, and I would be for it, certainly. We should declare war on terrorism, and we should take all the actions necessary to stamp it out. And that means working with our allies in close harmony, but also not to be hogtied by moral equivalence arguments which have seemed to dominate our response up till now.
So what kinds of arguments can you see coming out of some kind of a strike against terrorist facilities?
Well, I don't have to draw any pictures there. We've seen it for a number of years. We saw it even dominate our decision to let Saddam Hussein survive the Gulf War, for which we should be very have second thoughts on that today. But we also know that bin Laden has made it very clear that this is a war against the United States and Israel, and we should take action accordingly. We haven't done that. And those who are giving them harbor and sanctuary we should talk to in very forceful terms and take action if that's necessary. But for now, we Americans should avoid panic. We should stay united. We should shut up on what I call the recriminations of politically motivated operatives here in Washington. Unite behind our elected president and get on with the task of giving all the resources we can, our prayers, our physical resources, to the victims of this horrible attack and this act of war.
Al Haig, thank you. Stay with us if you would. You mentioned the president, and we want to replay for you now what the president had to say around 12:30 today. The president was taken from Florida to Shreveport, Louisiana, where he made this statement. Let's listen to what Mr. Bush said.
Freedom itself was attacked this morning by a faceless coward, and freedom will be defended. I want to reassure the American people that the full resources of the federal government are working to assist local authorities to save lives and to help the victims of these attacks. Make no mistake, the United States will hunt down and punish those responsible for these cowardly acts. I've been in regular contact with the Vice President, Secretary of Defense, the National Security Team, and my cabinet. We have taken all appropriate security precautions to protect the American people. Our military at home and around the world is on high alert status, and we have taken the necessary security precautions to continue the functions of your government. We have been in touch with the leaders of Congress and with world leaders to assure them that we will do whatever is necessary to protect America and Americans. I ask the American people to join me and saying a thanks for all the folks who have been fighting hard to rescue our fellow citizens, and to join me in saying a prayer for the victims and their families. The resolve of our great nation is being tested, but make no mistake, we will show the world that we will pass this test. God bless.
A grim-faced President Bush in an address to the nation made within the past hour and a half from Shreveport, Louisiana. This after the awful events took place over the span of about an hour and 45 minutes today. An airplane smashed into the World Trade Center tower just before 9 a.m. A second plane followed a little bit after 9 a.m. Eastern Time. A third plane, all of them hijacked, smashing into the wall of the Pentagon about 10 a.m., 9:45, I should say, and a fourth plane crashing in Pittsburgh. It is a day that has forever changed the future of this nation. The response yet to be determined.